Hey, everybody. Sean Murphy, Executive Director at 1455. Thanks for checking out Movable Type's annual State of the Art issue. 1455 fans will immediately recognize our special guest tonight, Matt Mendelsohn. We featured him last autumn at our Story Fest. He immediately became part of the family, and I now turn to him for a variety of reasons. But his expertise that he can bring to bear could not be more relevant and appropriate for tonight. And rather than read his bio, which on two levels, it would take too long because he's too accomplished, but also he can set the tone for this conversation because him talking about his background is half the battle tonight in terms of really representing how things have changed across all art forms. But as we start thinking about things like AI and where we're at in 2023, his life story is very illustrative. But we've covered in this issue a lot of angles. We've looked at music, we've looked at writing, and of course, all the writers and AI are obsessing about what might happen or what will happen. But with photography, I mean, it's already happening. So with that said, Matt, you were the first person I thought of for a variety of reasons. I'm so grateful that you're here tonight to drop wisdom. I would love you to let everyone know, like, why am I talking to you? Who are you?
Well, thank you for having me. Who am I? I've been a photographer for going on 39 years now, which is pretty amazing. Just because I'm old and because it means that I am part of this generation of photographers that started out in a completely analog world and now am finishing. I mean, I'm not dead yet, but finishing in a completely digital world. And so everything has changed. I mean, everything has changed. And, I was thinking about this before we signed on, and I thought it's like telling somebody who, rode horses in 1910 and then suddenly had to drive a car, a Model T, years later, that it's the same thing. They both get you to the destination. And you're like, no, it's not close to being the same thing. And so, I mean, I find myself in a profession that has completely and utterly changed. When I first started out in 1985, when I sold my first photograph in Binghamton, New York, after I graduated from school, photography still represented sort of ultimate truth. If you had a photograph, for the most part, 98%, it represented truth. Yeah. There've always been faked photographs since the beginning of photography. But when I started in photography, you had a picture and that represented something that happened. Now I'm 39 years later and I take a picture and it, for the most part, I'm in a profession now that people think is utterly false, like always false.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to grapple with that. And I'll tell you that, we talked about this, but I'll tell you a story, which is, I've been a photojournalist and I've been a portrait photographer. I've worked at very big newspapers. I worked at USA Today for 11 years. I worked at United Press International in the late 80s. That was my first job. I covered the Gulf War. I covered the invasion of Panama. I've been in hotel rooms with Stephen Hawking alone. I've been in, Susan Page, the reporter, was there. I've been in hotels with Nicole Kidman and Jennifer Aniston. I've done lots of cool things. And now I have evolved to this place in photography where I'm realizing that, maybe it's time to check out because this happened. I went to shoot bald eagles. I've never shot bald eagles. I'm not a wildlife photographer at all. But it's always one of those bucket list things. There's a place 2 hours from here called the Conowingo Dam. And even though I've been a news photographer and a portrait photographer and a wedding photographer and a family portrait photographer and a senior photographer, I've never shot wildlife. Yeah. But I see these pictures of eagles picking up fish at the dam for years from my friends. And I always thought, I want to go there and shoot eagles. So I asked my friend at Sony to give me a really long lens, a 600 millimeter lens. And I had a day off and I went to shoot eagles. And I got a pretty good eagle picture. I mean, even among all the pictures that I see of pictures of people at this dam, I got a pretty good one. Maybe it's because I was lucky. Maybe it's because I've been a photographer for 39 years. But on my first attempt, I got a pretty good eagle picture. And I posted it in their forum, in the group, the Birds of Prey forum. And everybody said, oh my God, this is an amazing picture. I've never seen a picture like this ever before. But for the first time in my life, a lot of people said, this must be fake. And I thought, this is strange. No one's ever told me in 39 years that one of my pictures was fake. And suddenly lots of people are telling me it's fake. And I thought it's so strange that it's happening with this eagle picture, because eagle pictures are not what I do. But for the first time, people were accusing my work of being fake. And I angrily got in the comment section and I said, it's a picture.
Yeah.
And it just sort of reminded me where we started, and how's it going, and that's where we are. We're in a place with photography where nobody trusts photography anymore, just like nobody trusts the paper you write in high school, and nobody trusts the paper you write in college, and nobody trusts an author. We're in this doubting world now because of all of this technology. And I thought, boy, you take a good eagle picture and suddenly, nobody believes it. So, that's where we are.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I find both fascinating and really kind of infuriating, I guess, on your behalf, on all visual artists and photographers, is like I said at the outset, we're still grappling with kind of the notion of, well, can AI write a novel? And the short answer is, well, yeah, it can, but it's imitation, and if you're fooled by that, what do you have to ask yourself, what are you looking for in the world of literature and all that kind of stuff. But with photography, I mean, I guess it's so much easier because an imitation can look like the real thing. It reminds me of that movie, The Thing, right? Where it's like, it looks like a human, but it's not a human. And I mean, the stakes are so much higher because what you do has, there's an expertise, years of expertise built in to get that shot. And it somehow cheapens it that some bozo behind, his or her computer can do that. What are your both?
There was a Sports Illustrated back in the early days of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. The issue was always shot by the greatest sports photographers. This I'm talking in the 1980s,
right?
And there was in the 1990s. I heard from a Sports Illustrated photographer who shot the swimsuit issue that year. There was a picture of this model out on this craggy rock with waves, and there was a dolphin diving over the picture. And everyone said this was the early days of what we called Cytex back then, the early Photoshop in newspapers. And everyone said, was this Photoshopped? And he said, no, we waited, we got a picture. Right. Now, people don't believe. I don't believe anything either. Here's a good example. A couple of months ago, you have this terrible earthquake in Turkey. Among the first responders were Greek rescuers. Obviously, Greece and Turkey are at odds forever and ever, but not the people, the governments.
Yeah.
Turkey appreciated that Greek medics rushed in. It sort of was a détente, and people were really emotional. And one of the first big rescues that we saw was a little girl who was rescued by Greek firemen. I just eat up news. I watch news every second of my life. And when this is because my wife is Greek and because I live on news, I was watching this coverage, every video that came out of it. So I watched this little girl get rescued. And after they pulled her from the rubble, some of the Greek firemen cried, and then they took her on a stretcher and they put her into an ambulance, and that was the end of the story. The next day, I see this photograph of a Greek rescuer with a Greek flag on his helmet, clutching this little girl who's wearing the Turkish flag on her shirt. And all of the comments said, this should win a Pulitzer. This is the greatest photo of the year. And I thought, holy crap, I watched the whole thing. Nobody ever carried her anywhere. They took her on a stretcher and they put her in a, and then I looked at it, and of course it was AI. And I know it's AI because I've been in this business for 39 years, and I could tell by the fingers. There were 6 fingers. AI is notoriously bad with fingers. But I just, I wasn't going to get involved and comment and say this is a fake, but it was an absolute fake. And the fact that normal people, regular people who are not in photography and are not in journalism said this is the photo of the year. And I just thought, this is the piece of crap of the year. It's just fake. This person didn't exist. This is, it's like a Frankenstein comprised of bits of pieces. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I sincerely, like, on your behalf, I mean, first of all, novelists and poets, we have our own little corner. So it's like, it's small consolation, but I feel like at this rate, no one can copy what we do, but also no one cares because no one reads poetry. But photography, right? You put it so perfectly earlier, like that, photographic memory, or, what was, I was thinking the other expression, but we used to have expressions like, the photo tells the tale, like that was how we validated reality. And I mean, it's really been turned upside down. And
right.
I don't know, like, what the stakes are in terms of, I mean, you just illustrated to go from the eagle photo, right? That's small stakes, albeit infuriating one.
It's a nature photo.
News stories, though.
Correct.
That's where it really starts getting. I think that's where some of the hysteria I mentioned earlier. I don't say that lightly. I think when in the world of like words, we're getting carried away. Like, can a robot write a novel? Like, well, who cares?
Right.
But if robots are taking pictures and using them as news, that's a real problem.
Right. And I mean, everybody sent these pictures of the Pope wearing a puffy coat, and at first I thought it's funny, but then, I tend not to share this stuff because it's just, the more it gets shared, the more it becomes like our reality. And I know I'm like spitting in the ocean here, but I try not to share that stuff because it just sort of is my own death. It's the death of my profession.
Right.
When I started in news photography, like when I sat on the desk at USA Today in 1992, if you had come up with a photograph of O.J. Simpson wearing Bruno Magli shoes, you would have cracked the case. You would have been lauded as a hero. You would have solved the case. Right. Now, if somebody were to come up with pictures of O.J. Simpson saying, I found them in my closet, there are pictures of O.J. Simpson wearing Bruno Magli shoes, nobody would believe you.
Yeah.
Photography as evidence is not any, it's just gone. It's gone. It's.
Well, and I think, what we've been talking about, and certainly in my circles and as a tech analyst over the last decade or so, we've talked about kind of the manufacturing of personal narrative, like on Facebook and social media. Like, we're crafting our stories, we're using filters, we're giving but there's always, at least amongst adults, there's this kind of understanding, like, you're obviously putting your best self forward. You took 50 selfies, you took the best one, so there's an element of understanding kind of authorial license. But again, talking about the world of photography and what it represents, there's no gray area anymore. And I'm flummoxed because I don't have a hot take on how we handle this.
It goes across the spectrum. I mean, you can say it's really bad when you fake a news picture of a rescuer saving a little girl, but it's kind of equally bad when every portrait studio in the country airbrushes braces off of 13-year-olds. And you think, well, the 13-year-old doesn't want to have braces, or the parent doesn't want their kid to have braces. But we're sort of like erasing a pillar of childhood, braces or acne or whatever, bad haircuts. Those used to be things that the tells of childhood. And now, those are fake too. I mean, you want your kid not to have braces? Just, click here and pay $5 and a retoucher will take the braces off. So it's across the board. It's every part. And I don't, for a long time, we had a home office downstairs in the basement, and I had taped to my computer this photograph that Edward Curtis took all the great photographs of the Native Americans, you know, at the turn of the century. And there was a picture of this Navajo scout, a young man, and it was just the most beautiful portrait. And it was taken on a, you know, view camera and with nothing in it, no mechanical anything, no electric,
Yeah.
just light and a box and film. And I thought, this is what I want to get to. Everyone is going, you know, like it's the scene in the Poseidon Adventure where the two groups meet and the guy says, you're going the wrong way, you're going the wrong way. The more technology increases, the less I'm interested in it. I use it. We're sitting here. I'm sitting in my front of my Apple MacBook and, you know, talking. I love that part of technology. I love my, you know, phone. I'm not like some Luddite, but I'm just sort of, when I see these AI pictures, they don't do anything for me. I don't know. You know, when I see a picture from the 1950s of New York in 1950, and I know it's on film and I know it's real, it moves me. But all of this stuff, it's dead to me.
Yeah, and I think what we're kind of circling around is the combination of expertise, which I think to some people can immediately sound elitist. It's not meant to sound that way at all. But what we're really getting at is authenticity. And I think that starts to speak to the socio-political stakes. You mentioned the braces and you know, the whole spectrum of Photoshop. What that is doing on a societal level, I think, is reinforcing the very things we write all these essays about, which is, you know, young girls and boys for that matter, but young girls for decades have looked at magazines and said, feel inadequate because everyone looks perfect. And then you realize even the models that we'd agree are the epitome of human perfection are touched up beyond belief. So we have been on this slippery slope. It, you know, was preceded by technology. I think technology has just blown it out of the water.
So it started with Photoshop in the early 90s, and we all thought Photoshop would kill photography.
Yeah.
I mean, because at that point I was in the newspaper business, and everyone was convinced that Photoshop was going to kill photography. It wounded photography. In the early days of photography, the Orange County Register changed the color of a pool and everybody was up in arms. And then National Geographic in the early 90s moved the pyramids so that they would fit on the cover with the type. And everyone thought that was the end of the world. And then, of course, speaking of OJ, Newsweek took the mugshot that was given out of OJ and darkened it, ostensibly to make him look more menacing. Time magazine used the same picture and they did not. And so Newsweek had this menacing African-American man on the cover and Time did not. But those were all sort of little glitches. They were, like I said, Photoshop wounded photography, but it survived. AI, I think, is killing photography. I just think it's sort of, we've gone from a wound to, like, you know, now our head is decapitated, not to be gross, but it's almost unrecoverable. I don't know how you go back to what you do unless you suddenly go back and pull out a film camera and start, you know, it doesn't have the same appeal to me anymore. And I'm you know,
well, you know, I think two things that you make me think of, Matt. The first is I think there's always kind of this retrenchment into authenticity. So I do think, you know, just like vinyl, you know, in the early days of vinyl, it was kind of like, oh, that's cute. And now people really kind of craved.
My daughter loves vinyl. She's 20 years old.
Yeah, there's a tactile. I do think, but that's more on a hobbyist level. I would ask you, what is a, you know, a young Matt Mendelsohn in 2023 graduating from college that has the bug and has the talent and the patience? What is the world like for young photographers? I mean, how have those stakes changed, like professionally?
Well, I think anybody who goes in, you know, anyone who goes into the few newspapers that are still hiring anybody, which is really, you know, a discussion for another day. You know, is now suddenly less a photographer and more a content creator, a word that whether you're a writer or a photographer, you know, you loathe because it represents everything that is wrong with what we do. You know, you're either a writer or you're a photographer, but who the fuck wants to be a content creator? You know, I mean, excuse my language, I'm sorry. a content creator. So you're
Yeah.
now like a jack of all trades. We're going to send you to the high school game and you're going to have to do video and still photographs and you'll do the story. And I mean, it shows somebody who's very competent, because I can't do all those things.
Right.
But it also just shows somebody whose, job has been cheapened a lot. I mean, I started at a staff at USA Today. I was in United Press International, where there were scores of photographers, scores.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it was incredible. And now, I mean, short of the New York Times and the Washington Post, there are very few newspapers that have more than just a couple of photographers, and those are all endangered jobs. So if you have a job, you're going out and you're sort of, again, creating content, and I don't know,
And let me ask you this: this is a tough one. I didn't have any intention of asking this, and you don't have to answer it or in any detail. But like, what do we say? What do you say to the cynics that are like, dude, get over it? Technology has always changed. It's made things easier and it's more accessible for the masses. Like, quit your bitching, dude. Like, what do you think? I'm sure you think deeply about the fact that
I don't want to be a get off my lawn guy. I mean,
sure.
again, I'm a lover of technology. I'm not a Luddite.
Right.
But I'm sure, if you fly an F-18 for a living, you probably go home, and on the weekends you have this biplane parked at the local airport, and you go up and why? Because you love to fly, and you love to feel, a real plane, sort of the basics of flight. I do that too. I just want to sort of always get back to like what I started with, and it's harder now because it's harder for me to shoot film, even though I love to shoot film, and I spent 20 years shooting film. Now it's hard to just get it developed. There's only a few labs, and it's costly to find film. Those are all excuses, but for the most part, it's just sort of I don't know how to say it, but yes, technology is fine. Technology has always existed. The Model T replaced the horse. I know all that stuff.
Yep.
I know too that if you ask somebody, would you rather get a love letter written by hand, or would you rather have an email that expresses the same sentiment? 99.9% of the people will say, I'll go for the letter written by hand.
Absolutely.
I mean, would you rather look at a manuscript of Beethoven's, or would you rather look at an email that has the same notes on it? No, I mean, there's something about the analogness of it all. There's something about the human part of it all. There's something about pouring yourself out of it's
I do. And I think we always have to recognize kind of the generational gaps that are inevitable. I mean, when you were just talking, it made me think inevitably of mixtapes. Speaking of a lost dinosaur art, I think people today wouldn't fully understand. It wasn't just that we had to take a boombox or a stereo and record each song. It was the thought that went into it, the flow, and it's kind of like iTunes.
It was a love letter. It was a love letter to your girlfriend or your boyfriend that you said, listen to this Squeeze song. I mean, it was you were giving something that you created.
Correct. Yeah, and the analogy, right, is that was the equivalent of a photographer setting up at the right location, waiting for the right light. It's not just the click of the shutter and then the things developed. There's the whole setup. There's the thought. There's the understanding of how the light will impact movement.
So a couple of years ago, I think I sent you this picture. I know I did. A couple of years ago, we took a vacation to Cape May. We were staying at a farmhouse B&B because we had our dog and we wanted to bring the dog. So we were about 5 miles outside of Cape May proper. I am not really a sit on the beach kind of guy. I like to wander around. But my wife and my daughter would like to go to the water every day. So I would drive them into town. I would drop them off at the beach, and then I would just drive around. And each time I passed this church with this ancient Civil War era cemetery. And each day I thought, I should really stop there. I should stop there. I should stop there. And I'm a big proponent of, you got to get off the couch. You got to get out of the car. And so finally one night I was like, get out of the car, Matt. And I was wandering around this creepy cemetery by myself, and it was sunset. And I thought I was on candid camera. The sunset was hitting in this cemetery, this graveyard. The sunset was hitting 3 headstones. 3 have this golden light, like the Raiders of the Lost Ark light coming off of them. And everything else is in the dark. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And it's one of my favorite pictures. It was just because you got to get out of the car. You got to make, an investment, and then you get returns. And so I love that picture,
Yep. Well, and Matt, I think that, we've talked about kind of the technological and the societal impact. I think one ray of genuine hope that I find is exactly what you just talked about. And what I would tell a younger, person with passion is some of this angst involves the personal gratification, right? You've articulated very clearly and excellently the stakes professionally and politically, but what you experienced there, Photoshop can't do. Somebody writing a poem, making a mixtape, et cetera.
Right.
That's the art that I don't think is going to be lost despite the technology. So even at its
but like the eagle picture, I'm sure when you show this picture, people will say, "Oh, that must be photoshopped." Of course, but it's not. And
yeah,
there's an issue outside of, all of this technology is method, and it's sort of a separate thing from passion and, art. And so, stories are stories are stories, and they will, whatever form they come in, whether they're, it still has to come from a human being.
Yep.
I like to practice this get off the couch photography all my life, even when I was doing news and after I left the news business in around 2001. One day at a wedding, a makeup artist that I see all the time, I would see her every week at the same weddings. The same people would hire the same makeup artist. I went into a room expecting a bride and groom at the Willard, a bride getting ready. And I saw my friend, the makeup artist, Kim, crying quietly in the corner. And of course, the bride and her friends didn't care about the makeup artist crying. And I walked into a room and I said, "What's going on, Kim?" And she said, "Say a prayer for my friend's daughter." Because I'm a good listener, I guess, for stories. I said, "What's going on with your friend's daughter?" She told me about this young woman at VCU who had just graduated with a degree in fashion merchandising, and a month or 2 after graduation went into the hospital for a routine procedure on her Crohn's disease, her intestines, that went bad, and she ended up with all her limbs amputated from septic shock. And that became like, over 8 years, I ended up driving down to Richmond. Why? I don't know, because it just was like an incredible story of human triumph. I mean, she had prosthetic legs, prosthetic arms. She went back to teaching at her alma mater. She had an outlook on fashion and body image that nobody has.
Yeah.
And then she became the first quadruple amputee in history to receive a bilateral arm transplant at Penn Hospital. So it was just the most absurd, crazy story of human triumph that I've ever been around. And that came from like a makeup artist in a hotel saying, "Say a prayer for my friend's daughter." So those stories can't be generated by AI.
That's right.
That commitment can't be generated by AI.
Yeah.
Carol Guzzi, one of the great photojournalists of all time, is not generated by AI. Carol Guzzi, when the war in Ukraine started, the week before the war started, there was a snowy owl that had landed at Union Station and was perched atop the statue of Christopher Columbus at Union Station. And every night, hundreds of people would go out with their cameras, me included, to shoot this. Carol Guzzi, the greatest photojournalist of our generation, was there every night shooting the snow eagle. And then a week later, she was in Ukraine for 6 months. You know, you don't generate that commitment from AI. That's because Carol Guzzi is an incredible human being, an incredible photographer.
Yeah.
You know, her heart says, I need to be now in Ukraine, enough with snowy owls. You know? And
Right.
so in that sense, I'm not worried about, you know, artists and journalists.
Right.
The technology is problematic for sure.
It is, but once again, you've done 1455 a service by really just articulating succinctly what we talk about all the time as we kind of approach what is story, why does it matter, why do we do it, how do we do it. There's always this notion of community, authenticity, and this personal satisfaction that comes from giving and sharing and receiving genuine expression. And your story, you know,
Right.
of your trips to Richmond, that comes from a human impulse, right? That goes
Right.
beyond
It has to.
technology and money.
If you found out that "And So We Beat On, Votes Against the Current, Born Ceaselessly" was written by a computer, you'd go, oh, you know, but it was not written by a computer. But I mean, that's the thing. So when photography is real, it's unbelievable. And when you know it is fake, it's just dead to you, you know,
Yeah.
and that's, or dead to me. And that's the difference. The minute I see this AI stuff on Facebook every day, people, you know, the Pope wearing the puffy coat, I'm just like, I just turn it off because it has no interest to me. I know that it was created by a computer and it has no interest to me.
Yeah, and I think the reality, you know, as this starts to shake out in the months and years ahead, you know, people aren't going to have AI images on their walls or in their offices. I think that'll be the ultimate arbiter of authenticity, even if it works as a shortcut or, you know, a facsimile. People do crave the story behind these images. Your famous story that became one of Obama's favorite pictures. You know, the picture itself does all the work. It's brilliant and it tells a story, but the story behind it becomes the life and the soul that I think the people that are buying these images are responding. That's what they're connecting to.
That photograph, by the way, I mean, was one of the least exciting photographs I've ever taken, but I mean, it's a rainy night at the Lincoln Memorial on election night. And, you know, there's nothing, you know, important about what's in the photograph, but when you know what's in the photograph,
Right.
It suddenly has this, you know, incredible meaning. And for, you know, the president to say it's his favorite photograph of his election, you know, is unbelievable to me. And that photograph started by me sitting on the couch in Arlington, Virginia, saying, I can't believe I'm not employed, you know, by a news organization, and getting off the couch. So you know, that's the thing that I always, great writing and great journalism, great art is always created by human beings who get off the couch and do something. You know, you're moved when somebody goes to Ukraine, you know, to help. You know, I was reading in the Post today about doctors who are traveling to give their services. You're moved by that because it's a person. You're moved by Jose Andres. You're moved by all of these things always that are personal triumphs and personal commitments. You're not moved by AI. I just, you know, it can write you a resume and it can make you a headshot. You know, it'll replace headshot photography because a lot of people will say, this is great. Look, I can look like this. But for me, it will never move me.
Right. Well, and you've articulated exactly why. And I think you've also, yet again, and I thank you, we talk so much about, you know, again, getting back to authenticity in all forms of story and art. What is the hack? What's the shortcut? What's the class I can take? And it's like, you need to put in the time. You need to have a genuine passion. You need to cultivate and respect the talent and the teachers. But there's also the element of serendipity. There's the element of there is no path that will guarantee you get from point A to point Z. And your whole life story, Matt, on professional, personal, artistic integrity just circles back on those themes of you have to have the talent. You have to put in the time. You have to believe in it. But you have to get off the couch too. And you never know what's going to happen. You have to go to that graveyard. So you are an unbelievable inspiration to me personally, but I think your story and the stories that you tell with the lens and when you talk about it, that is so nourishing in a time where we're worried about, are computers going to replace art? My answer is absolutely not. But as you've pointed out, we're in a tricky time. But in the meantime, I think we can take comfort in there are still real human beings with stories to tell and real human beings that want to hear those stories.
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't see myself as anybody special. I've had a nice career. It's been fun. I've gotten to do things, a whole spectrum of photography that I never thought I would, from, an occasional war to high school seniors. I mean, I've done sort of a lot in photography, and I've been very fortunate to do that. But it's always the same. It's always like pictures that come from you. When I did this Yorktown High School project during COVID, yep, I shot 550 free portraits. Why? Because I felt bad for these students. And, it was low-hanging fruit, the idea to do it at that time. And then everybody was like, how did you do this? You just got to get off the freaking couch,
And that's actually a beautiful way to end this particular discussion, which will, of course, be continued because it will go on. But if I'm not mistaken, our co-chair of the 1455 board and my dear friend, our mutual dear friend, Karen Vasquez, if I'm not mistaken, saw that project and was so inspired. She reached out to you, you two connected, and she came to me at some point and said, you have to meet this guy. So again, right there, low-hanging fruit teed up on a platter. That's how we got to know each other through that act that you did. So again, I don't think it's I certainly don't think that it's
I call it
shallow to point out that these connections are what inspire us to seek out real meaningful kind of exchanges.
I call it the daisy chain of humanity. I meet Karen. I mean, it just goes on. It just goes on. You meet people and you connect, but it's always a human endeavor, and AI cannot touch that.
Well, we can leave it there. That's a beautiful mic drop. Folks, if you've been checking this out, you see why I'm so crazy about this guy. We're going to run. You'll be able to click down when you're looking at this, a nice sampling of his photography, but there'll be links embedded. Check out his work. Check out his site. Check him out. Follow him. Support him. Check out art. Support art. And to be continued. So, Matt, thank you, as always, again, for sharing your wisdom and your art. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much.
All right, my friend.
All right. See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.